We are back, ladies and gents, kings and queens, with episode 34 of the Dream Shakers podcast. I am your host, George Nunez, alongside with my co-host,
Stephon Odom.
and today we are here with a special guest. And that special guest is Khalil R. Bilal, a growth equity investor at TCB. Khalil graduated from Penn State University with a Bachelor's of Science in Finance. He was a vice president of the Nittany Lion Fund, a student-ran hedge fund where he managed more than $8 million in assets, AUM, assets under management. He is a Harvard SVMP alum, such as myself and Steph, and he was previously a tech investment banking analyst at BAML, also known as Bank of America. Welcome to the Dream Shakers podcast, Kahlil.
Appreciate you, man.
Of course, brother. How you feeling today?
Dude, I'm feeling good, man. Be 100% honest, I just came out from balling, man. I have to take at least 15 minutes to get some shots up before I do anything.
I hear that. I hear that. Listen, man, the fourth quarter, they need you to score. They need you to bring it home, just like Giannis in the finals, man.
That's right, man. That's right.
Absolutely. Now, we know that you have an illustrious career thus far, very decorated. You've reached, a lot of success. But we also know that there were some beginnings that people don't know about. So what was it like growing up in the DC area? The people want to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna be 100%. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs, Bowie, Maryland, right? Like, so it was different for me, but I think it was still humbling. I went to a lot of schools, just to give you context, like they would have these tag talented and gifted programs, that, moms or dads would kind of push you into. Luckily, I was in that. But what they do is they take the worst performer in school and they put it there to helpfully, help that. So I would take a bus just, straight into a rougher part of, the area. And that's where I went to school. So it was a hard division between, talented and gifted other students. But, people intermesh. So I saw a lot of different stuff, which was good, I think. Just to see, not just be secluded to the suburbs. But anyway, in that program, I got a lot of experience just being with a ton of different people from a ton of different backgrounds. I mean, you may know the DC area is super diverse. And so,
they call it Chocolate City from what I hear.
Exactly. I mean, you got the white chocolate, the caramel chocolate, you got all the different types, man. So I hung out with a ton of different people. But I think that just gave me broad exposure to a little bit of everything. I grew up loving sports, loving math, loving new things of any type, space, and being in that environment, I got a little taste of everything. But I also think, the grit, right? Like, you can't just walk down the hallway and like, I don't know. You gotta have your guard up. You gotta be ready for somebody to try to join on you, which I think is good in business. So, we learned a lot of good stuff, but you also learned a lot of the soft skills of dealing with different people. And I learned that, I think, pretty early, starting with elementary school, really, maybe earlier. But yeah, so.
Coming from this humble beginning, right, and moving through these varied environments, you ultimately found yourself at Penn State, right? And when you were at Penn State, much like George was mentioning earlier, you were the vice president of the Nittany Lion Fund, right? The Nittany Lion Fund. And there was a considerable amount of assets that you oversaw, right? Like that you had to be responsible for. And you credit that as your first taste of investing, right? Like this was a integral moment for you. So how was that experience? And then what led up to this passion for finance?
Yeah. So the experience in and of itself was a great one. I don't think there's a lot of student funds in the nation that are, use endowment money. But our fund is actually the only one that has actual just investors. A lot of them are alumni of Penn State. Um, And so that just kind of turns it up a notch. Like at times I would have calls from direct investors like, you know, what the hell are you doing? I just, like, and you have to have a good response. And um, you don't really get that, right, in classes. And so, yes, in and of itself, it was an amazing experience. Now, what led up to that? I mean, you may know, there's a ton of students at Penn State. I mean, in general, and at University Park, I mean, you're talking 30, 40,000. And then you kind of narrow that down to the College of Smeal, still a ton of students and a ton of people in finance. The Nittany Lion Fund would take probably 10 or 12 kids a year. And so, it was a very strenuous process to get into the fund, is what we call it for short. And we had on the first, when as vice president, we would have about 400, 500 students show up interested in the fund the first day, and slowly narrow that down into more like 8 or 10 students. And so personally, when I came to Penn State, I had no finance background. I knew nothing about stocks really. And look, I'll tell you guys, don't tell my family, but I used to go to the library and I would sneak out with a couple books for dummies about stocks, and I would read. That's how I learned, man. I mean, just being 100%, I didn't feel like having to take it back, and so I just held on to it. I'm like, they can't be that mad. I'm learning about finance. I'm in school, right? And so that's really where it started. But the interest in business really began my summer before I decided to go to Penn State, which I did a program at Penn State. It's called Boss. And essentially they introduce students of different backgrounds to business. I had no family in business, that kind of thing. I was into engineering. Everybody was pushing me towards that, which I thought was pretty cool, but probably wasn't my passion. But for a long time, that's what I was going to pursue. And until that program, that's when everything changed. So I was able to, come up with an idea. We pitched it together to this fake board of investors, and I just got a little taste of what that felt like, what that looked like, and I just felt at home really, and I knew that I wanted to pursue business and kind of recreate that experience in a more tangible, in a real life fashion. And last point on that is what it really boils down to is like the power of business, and what I'm so drawn to it by is, there's a ton of technology in the world that's amazing. And as an engineer, or from an engineering background, you see that. But a lot of that stuff never sees the light of day because it's kind of in the R&D stages, or it's really raw, and it can't, you know, Stefan, you talk about the human and computer interaction. I mean, that's that's um, that's basically what businesses, I think, provide the gap between. Like they take ideas and great technology and bring it to market so that more people can experience it and add value to their lives. And that's why I think I got into business, because I love technology. I love talking to people. Um, I love creating new things. And I think business, especially in tech, you get to do all of that. So that's my little spiel.
Perfect. So you talked about your experience when you were managing the assets in the fund, and you talked about your affinity for tech, but you got into banking,
Yeah.
investment banking. You chose coverage, or maybe it chose you,
Mhm.
coverage over product. You were in the TMT group. What was that experience as a tech banker, and um, how did you kind of navigate through it all, right? From working through the models, working through the pitch books, pitch decks, working those late nights, dealing with the corporate politics. What was the culture like at Bamboo? I mean, speak to. I did
Yeah.
banking as well, so I'm
Yeah.
pretty familiar.
Yeah.
But walk us in the audience through that experience.
Got you. So, I mean, you're probably asking, you want to do all this innovative stuff. Why are you in banking, right? Like, and that's a very fair question, man. I couldn't answer that, but it's where my life led me. Going into Nittany Lion Fund, kind of lined that opportunity up in investment banking, And just an important distinction, I actually did M&A for 2 summers. That was my internship experience in M&A. Wasn't the right fit because I just really I had a hunger for more, being more involved in tech and with tech companies. And so that's why I made a pivot right before full time, which was a very crazy process, just to
And
give
and,
you a
and, and,
taste.
and real quick, Khalil, could you talk about like M&A and what that really is, just so the audience has some
Yes.
context?
Okay, yeah, mergers and acquisitions. So, you're doing think about it like the last mile. So you'll have like a coverage group. I think George, you were in healthcare. So something comes up in healthcare, big $40 billion deal, maybe a smaller one, and then M&A might get involved to actually do the down and dirty M&A, you know, which is just like a ton of modeling, ton of assumptions about things that are going to happen and scenarios. So you get a ton of modeling experience, which is actually, it serves me really well because it's not something that I struggle with. And I think it's important in finance. But so that was the M&A experience. Did that for 2 summers. It was very hard. I mean, in general, I think product groups are known to be a little bit harder. Um, and I tried to go for the hardest one, really, just to get as much experience as I could. And I think I got a good taste of that after 2 summers and decided, yeah, I think I'll go into coverage, And that experience was crazy because I think I had a scenario which doesn't really happen often, which is I did not get a return to the M&A group at Bank of America. I had a return to every group except M&A, which I don't know how that happened, but it happened. And then they said, hey, look, man, you just figure it out, find a spot that works. And I'm like, well, I only want to go into TMT, so and it took a lot. So basically, they told me one day, look, TMT's closed, no more spots open. You might want to start thinking about, CNR or another opportunity. And then, the next day was, hey man, we got a slot open in Palo Alto. You want it? And so that's how it turned out. But it was a lot of ups and downs, a lot of meeting people, calling people, but it all worked out. So um, the TMT group, I think, was a good choice going out to Palo Alto, California. Um, Obviously, the weather's great. uh, a lot of benefits there, and you get more exposure to like strategic stuff about the company, a lot of pitch decks, but you get to understand and focus more on like what a company does, and that was important to me. Just from an experience, perspective, I wanted to be able to learn those things, and for that to be a part of the job. So I think it was really good for just building my character and my experiences.
So you fight for this placement, right? You go to bat for yourself to be made a part of this group, right? You end up on the West Coast. You love the weather. You love the strategic aspects. You love the ability to their proximity, right? How close you are to these companies.
Yeah.
And you have the underlying passion on top of all that of just deep interest in technology, right? So why then did you decide to come back to the East Coast, right? Given that everything seemingly was going real well.
Yeah, man. There's an important piece of information that I think will clarify all that. So I actually have a daughter. The same day that I graduated college, I had my daughter Annalise. So investment banking,
Congrats
newborn.
on the blessing, by the way, brother. And I know it's late, but happy Father's Day.
Appreciate you, man. And so yeah, I mean, I moved out to California with my daughter in one hand, fiance, and just a job that I really didn't know what to expect from. And so it was a crazy 2 years, man, especially during COVID. I mean, just imagine that. You got a 6-month-old, you got clients calling, and you're in a 1 bedroom apartment. So, and I didn't have family out there. So, you know, you start thinking about proximity to family and people that can support you. And luckily, when I got my TCV offer, we can talk about that, but They had an office in Menlo and in New York. And so I really wanted to be back on the East Coast for those reasons, just proximity to family and for both me and my partner. Yeah.
And so that makes sense, right? And we appreciate that clarity. But let's transition it a bit in terms of growth equity now, right? Because now this is a new chapter in your life. You leave BAML, you go into growth equity. So the real question is, why growth equity over VC, venture capital, PE, private equity, or even working at a startup, or maybe even creating your own startup? Like, walk us through that. Like, why choose GE over everything else? We spoke a bit about this offline, but
Yeah.
let's give some more context for the viewers.
So private equity, just a different appetite for deals, right? In general, big generalization, I mean, they're looking for a lot later stage companies that they can come into and invest. Some of them kind of want to cut costs, you know, um, just reorient the business, restructure the business, sell it later. That's the general model. For me, I wanted to kind of be more a part of that growth strategy for companies. And so that kind of weeded out PE for me. And so then you go into like startup VC, growth equity, right? So in college, I mean, I had the opportunity before I even started at BAML to just focus on a startup. We were building that out of Penn State, and it was doing very well. They're still doing well. Um, Laundry startup, and I had a great experience there. But with the family, I had to have a more secure option. So for me, starting a startup just wasn't the right time for me to really go 100% in. And then VC versus growth equity. I think I was honestly up for either one, but I also think that growth equity, you get exposure to, some pretty significant stuff. I mean, on a daily basis, you're looking at some big companies. You're able to put in a lot of capital, and the good thing about the firm I'm at is, you get to see everything. Nothing's off the table. I mean, truly, except for maybe Series A. That's about it. And even that's starting to break down. So we look at every interesting category leader in tech, and that's all I do. So that's perfect for me. So once I found that, I mean, I personally just didn't really care about the other stuff, at least for now, because I would get experience, talking to CEOs of these companies and being a part of the growth that they have. And one last thing is, I think the company TCV, the companies that they invest in, they're not just VC investors. They give you money and they say, go ahead. A lot of times, like there might be, hey, check up with me every few months. But the companies don't have to, nor do they really want to, because they're very much in the early stages. They might have a lot of other things going on. But when we come in, at least on a good 25 or 30 or 40% of our names, we have a significant like interest in our companies, and we work right alongside them in finding management and deciding what markets to attack, who to acquire, doing the actual M&A. So I've been helping with all of those things in the portfolio. So I think you just get a ton of diverse experience from sourcing to M&A to investing, just the entire thing. So growth equity is a sweet spot for me.
Okay, so given the variety of growth stages you're able to interact with at TCV, one question that I had for you was, what's it been like working with the executive teams at these companies, right? Has there been instances where there's a bit of friction because you're seen as an outside third party and they're not necessarily sure if you're operating with their best interests in mind?
Yeah, totally understand that question, and I think that's a good question for a PE firm. But for growth equity, I mean, we're going to the altar. We're getting married, man. I mean, this is, and again, it's 40%. Some deals we do are like, hey, there's a lot of interest from everybody. You got the top guys in there, and they might not even want to talk to us after. But, there's a lot of other companies that we do have a very, very involved relationship with. And I mean, we want to have a partnership, and that's what we go in with, and it's very known. And we really strive to understand the companies like extremely well. Like, I mean, again, you can really compare it to a marriage because it's communicating about, hey, what do you think? What do you see? And they're open to that because that's just the relationship we built. Where it's like, hey, I know you understand my company because you've done a lot of stuff for that, and we trade ideas, and it's very open and free flowing. And I don't think we would get into. I mean, I only have my limited experience to speak from, but like, I don't think we would do something like that unless there was an open relationship with like sharing ideas and making that a correspondence. But I haven't ran into any issues with that because I think we do a good job of understanding the company's interests well, what they do, how they operate, the industry they're in. One quick thing about TCV, unlike a lot of VCs and some other funds, is that, I mean, we're verticalized in our structure. So again, I cover fintech, healthcare, ed tech, and that's all we do. And so we have our specific team on that. And so when we go into a healthcare or whatever deal, we do a lot of due diligence and understanding that because that's our industry. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think we've run into that with portfolio companies in my experience. I think they're actually very open and want our help in different aspects to find talent. And that's how we kind of sell our brand, like partner with TCV because, we not only give you money, you can go get some money from a lot of different firms when you're growing like a lot of these companies are, but can you get exposure to the relationships we have? Can you get, all of those other soft things that we bring to the table, understanding your business really, really well, and maybe even better than a lot of your current board of directors, right? Like that's what we are bringing to the table. So, yeah, I haven't had that.
And just for the audience to say, well, what is TCB's investment strategy?
It's very simple, man. Invest in category defining companies. And that's really it. I mean, there's a threshold of, like companies that are too early for us. I mean, we are in the growth equity stage. We have a mandate to follow in some sense, but like anything goes these days because there's a lot of companies that are raising ridiculous rounds at Series A and B. And, we're doing things to be able to address and be a part of those rounds earlier and build relationships earlier. So we're just looking for, again, we're investors in Netflix, Spotify, Facebook, Peloton, LegalZoom, a lot of companies early on. We're looking for those types of companies and in software as well, B2B and B2C.
Fair point. Fair point. I know you talked a little bit about fitted laundry, but could you dive a bit deeper into uh, what was the thought process around making those investments in fitted laundry and TxtCart? And in your opinion, do you think investing is an art, a science, or a mixture of both?
Yep. So I'll start with Fitted. That was my first, investment in any like, startup really. Um, so the founder is super interesting, super determined, super great guy to work with in general. I always enjoyed his energy. And he had an idea basically to, provide laundry services for college kids. A lot of people in school don't have, there's a lot of dirty machines. People don't want to do it. And college kids in general they struggle. It's your first time out of the house. Your mama ain't doing your laundry no more. You might want to pay $10 and get it done and fold it, right? Because honestly, that stuff is hard, even for me today. So I've been trying to get him to give me that service out here. But anyway, I basically was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Then he had this epiphany, like, hey, we're actually doing something that's pretty intimate. Like the clothes you put on every day, like those things matter, right? And they also tell the world about who you are. And it's like, that's pretty cool. And then they're like, what does that mean? How can we actually bring that into the business idea? So essentially they take photos of the laundry upon like people allowing that. And they take photos of it and they basically upload it to a digital wardrobe for individuals that do it. And basically they use computer vision to basically pick out all of the different aspects of the clothes, brands that'll pick up colors, designs, things like that. And they're building a database of basically clothing that people are wearing on a day-to-day basis. And so it's really interesting in that regard. And so they're gaining traction and they're expanding. So I invested in them. I was actually doing the laundry for a while at Penn State. Frat guy, like a whole frat house. That was me. So and so my Sundays were pretty boring. I was in some random laundromat doing and folding clothes until we partnered with a lot of different laundromats across Philadelphia and across, the nation now. And so I learned a lot about what it takes to build something like that. And we had a pretty solid team, I think, going out and trying to accomplish it at that age. And then second is TxtCart, really interesting business. They've grown a ton in those 2 years. Started as like, hey, Shopify stores. They have a ton of abandoned carts, and that's one of the biggest things. So like 60% of checkout gets stopped at abandonment in a cart. And so a lot of different companies are going out and attacking like, how do we extract that out? So TxtCart essentially built an add-in on Shopify that they can add into their store. And so when they do have an abandoned cart, they basically work to convert it. So they use different marketing ways to basically convert that customer. And so as soon as they turn on, they add value to a customer by converting a ton of different abandoned carts. So that's dumb, and they've done really well. They probably can't say too much about it, but yeah, they're doing some cool stuff. And did I miss something? Yeah, investing is more of an art and a science for sure. You gotta figure out like where are the founder's weak points. Everybody has weaknesses. I have weaknesses. Every founder is gonna have weaknesses. And so just like being really aware of what those are and if they affect the business, because ultimately at an early stage, founders are all you got, dude. I mean, if something happens to them, you don't have a business. And so you really got to have that belief in them to go out and do it. And a lot of times, I think I have a decent sense for like, you know, this founder is serious. This founder knows the industry. Sometimes I feel like I'm more confident than them, but I think that's because I can see from the outside and see, yeah, like he's gonna do something. And I think that's the biggest thing. Are they going to do something? Are they gonna build something? And that's it. If you build something, then you can do something with that. Like you can sell it, you can build it out further, expand the team. As long as it doesn't dry up and die, like you're in the green, which is the biggest thing with startup investing. As long as it's alive, you're good. That's it. So, yeah.
We also saw that you were a part of boards, right? And you were a part of the boards for these companies as well. How does the board role differ from just a standard advisor to someone that's a founder, right? Like what is the separation and responsibility there? And how involved with the startup are you as a board member? And what's the frequency of board meetings on a yearly basis?
Yeah. My role is a little bit more informal. I just get calls every once in a while when things happen, when my expertise is, needed in some regard. And so, just looking at different opportunities in the market, like I'll get a call, a new deal, there's a call. It's very much just like that. And, I like to catch up with them, see how they're doing, maybe give them some parting, motivation advice, if I can offer it. But, it ebbs and flows. I'm busy with work, but I definitely try to keep in touch with what they're doing and offer any value I can to them. Um, So that's kind of what it looks like. It's not a very like stringent, hey, we have a board meeting every month and you're responsible for this and this. It's very much like, oh, hey, we're doing this. Any chance you can help, you know, and then I step in and try to help.
Yeah. What are some of the, well, backtrack, because this is going to be a two-part question here. And silly us, because we should have asked this from the very beginning.
Mm.
What is growth equity for people that don't know, but are interested in understanding more? Like what does that entail? What does it mean to you? And what do you think are some concrete steps that Black and Latino professionals can take to break into this space? Like what does that typical path look like?
Yeah. So just to give the landscape, we talked about it earlier a little bit, but you have the angel investors, then you have the VCs, right in between is growth equity, PE. Honing in on growth equity, like these are companies that are probably doing at least 10 or 20 million, probably 20 million in revenue at minimum. So they're growing. They're growing pretty fast. And the whole thing about it's in the name, growth equity. So we invest in growth. These are companies that are like, hey, we're doing really well. Give us some money and we can do even better. And that's what we invest in. And so that's what growth equity is really. And so as far as how to get into growth equity, I think, a lot of people there's really two different paths there. One is, well, there's a lot of paths to anything, but what I would say most people come through is consulting or investment banking. Is what I've seen. So they like a lot of different growth equity funds and even PEs like to have both consultants and people from investment banks. So I'll just explain for people the process of going from an investment bank or consulting into a growth equity or a PE firm. So what happens is you actually will have headhunters hit you up as soon as you get into, you might have experienced getting on a job at one of these big, investment banks, and they will basically want to meet with you, get a feel for you. And I treat it like a first round interview. They are essentially, they're the gatekeepers. If you're a little weird, if you got, you don't really know what you're doing, you want to have a clear vision about like, you know what, man, I went in there, I'm like, I didn't really know what I wanted, but they would never know because I went in there and it might have changed every interview, but when I went in there, I knew what I wanted. I want PE, bro. I want I want growth equity, and it changed every day. But even though, I mean, that actually ended up getting me a lot of different stuff in my inbox. So they're like, this guy wants PE. We got to get him in front of this firm. So they would send that to me. This guy wants growth, and they would send that to you. And so basically they're feeling people out and seeing, hey, where's this guy fit with the firms we cover? Each headhunter covers different growth equity, VC, PE shops. And so you kind of, you gotta navigate. I was able to get my hands on, through connections, that list of who covers who. And so I was able to kind of reach out to specifically the people that covered the firms I was interested in and get in touch with them, have some meetings with them. And it worked out well. They were able to put me in front of the firms that were interesting for the most part. And then once you get there, I mean, that's when you step into the ring, man. I mean, and I can tell you, I mean, my interviews, I felt like I don't even know a good comparison, but if somebody were to go into a fight and get beat up, that's what I felt like on prime TV. And they took everything out of me, man. Uh, every last drop of information I knew, I put it out there, and I think I did all right, with the interviews. But yeah, it takes a lot of preparation, man.
You had to do phenomenally. You there, man. You made it to the other
You,
side,
you,
brother.
you did your thing.
Yeah, by a hair, man. If they had asked me one more question, I might have just broken down. So, I had just enough, I felt like, to just really show what I had, and so they were impressed by it. But yeah, it was really good. And I will say the hardest thing for me was the studying, because you're in investment banking. right? And you got to make a decision. You got to make a decision saying, look, am I going to be in investment banking forever, or am I going to find my way out? Because you can work forever 18 hours a day. You don't have much more time than that. So, I was like, I'm going to take and I'm going to, for those hours, and I'm going to get this next role. And a lot of people wanted to be so great at investment banking and good at their current role that they said, I can't do that. And because of that, they weren't prepared when the interviews came, and they're still there and they don't want to be. So you got to make that decision for yourself. And I think that's probably the most important thing, because you got to, knowing what you want and seeing that path to get there, I think is critical. And then taking the steps to actually do it. That was the biggest barrier that I saw um, in the place. And that's probably what set me apart, because I made that decision early.
I wanted to ask this really quick before Steph chimes in. I mean, that's the final doozy, because this is very important here. Tell us about what is it like being a father, right? Like, raising your, and what it means to raise a daughter in America. Like explain to us what you have to do. How is that experience? Because I think that's important here.
Yeah. So George, you probably been in you probably seen what an investment banker looks like. If you were to draw him on paper, he would probably be stiff, right? Like he'd probably be like, like a soldier going to war. I mean, now put a baby in that dude's hand, and then think about what that looks like. Like, dude, I had to change everything, man. I think becoming a father changed everything for me. And what that looked like for me was, it softened me up, right? It really made me aware of, a lot of other components outside of just working hard and getting stuff done, but like being patient, being aware, right? It takes a lot of awareness when you have to figure out what's going on with somebody who cannot speak and is just screaming at you. Like, you got to figure that out. You got to read the room essentially. But I had to pick up on those things to be a good father. Um, and you learn, when you're doing that with a partner and you're doing it young, right? Um, it's very hard. And I worked 14, like 12, 14-hour days. And I try to come home, try to get home, get out, see her before I left, see her when I got home. But it's difficult to build that connection. And honestly, doing investment banking is a huge sacrifice if you have a family, man. Um, it really is. But I really tried not to sacrifice that, and to the best of my abilities. And I made sure I had time to do that, to be a good father, being aware, being there, being present, and making sure that, just like I prioritize, the numbers being right in the model, that you prioritize your family, because that's really the most important thing. And those are the people that matter most, not the MD that's yelling at you because you can't, you're not fast enough. Um, and so I think ultimately being a father in America is difficult, especially for a minority, I think, because you have to prepare, your children for a different experience. It's not an experience that, is always a good one. So just being aware of that and preparing them young in some regard, I think is, one of the responsibilities you bear, in addition to whatever else you got going on.
Well, you've provided an immense amount of perspective, of insight, of knowledge, of guidance on today's pod, and we appreciate you for that, Kahlil. But we are at the final question. Final
Okay.
question for today, but not final question forever. And here at Dream Shakers, we're all about paying it forward, right? So, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to your younger self, and maybe it's to some of those bankers that are still there?
Yeah, yeah. I would say, um, for one, I would say, loosen up. That's probably number one. Just sometimes there's actually power to letting go. You don't need to control everything. When you're in banking, they tell you got to manage all this stuff. The first thing you do is you grab tight on it. You're like, I gotta hold it. You know, I gotta manage all this stuff, and you want to like put it in a nice formal box. But when you're communicating with people and you're going out and you're trying to build connections and live life, like you can't live life like that, right? You can't live life like a banker. So it's important to understand that, hey, look, you can be super organized with banking, but don't carry that outside of workplace. uh, so loosen up and make sure you have perspective outside of what you do, because we do it for 12, 15, 14 hours a day. It's hard not to get caught up in it, but really try not to let that overwhelm you or carry forward in your other life. Number two would be, I would say, to my younger self, I would say, be nicer to yourself. As bankers, you're very critical. It's like, what did I do wrong? That's the most important question. Am I doing something wrong? Like, that's the question that I think a lot of people are looking for. They don't care if you say, hey, you did great on this. It's like, okay, but what did I mess up? And I think you gotta be more loving to yourself, and really recognize that, like, whether your MD's mad at you about a model, it's gonna be fine. Like, it happens. And putting stuff into perspective, and knowing that, look, being responsible for what you are can be responsible for, which is, hey, I'm putting my best foot forward. I'm learning every day. I'm passionate about what I do. Who cares what the heck happens outside of that, right? So that, and then I think the third thing, really, it kind of is in line with the first point, but I mean, um, I say I say definitely, uh, definitely look out for yourself, because banking is not a very, like, hey man, I really care about you, bro. Like, I bet you do. I bet you can't hear that being said anywhere. Maybe you can, but I never heard it. So you gotta really protect your energy and protect your interests. Because banking is not the most caring place in the world. So that's what I would say.
Well, so much insight, so much free game, so much gems and jewels you provided on this podcast. We truly appreciate you. We thank you for your time. We don't take it for granted. And we definitely plan to follow you on your journey, on your career, and invite you back on the show for many more times for us to converse and keep us updated. Also keep the audience updated on the success. So appreciate you again on this episode, and we look forward to hearing from you soon, brother. But it means a lot. Thank you again.
I appreciate you guys, and thanks for making this stuff happen, man. We need more of that. So I'm glad you guys are creating content, putting it out there. You're doing a great thing, man.